If you've clicked on this video, I'm willing to bet you're familiar with Steam Next Fest, Valve's tri-annual sales/marketing event where new games hit the PC marketplace in an absolute tsunami. The latest instance of this big old demo drop has just arrived, but unfortunately it also happens to coincide with the launch of Monster Hunter Wilds. With all billion of those players otherwise predisposed/suddenly sick from work, they may miss out on some hidden gems from Next Fest that are worth keeping an eye on. That just won't do. I've decided to forego adventuring with Palicos for now so I can test some of the mini games in the February Next Fest and I can catch you lot up to speed. I played so many interesting demos that I wanted to talk about, but I couldn't possibly think of the right format, and that's when I remembered that humans just love visualized data. A good spreadsheet or pie chart can get the right kind of person salivating at the mouth, and thus I thought a classic tier list was appropriate. I'm going to try and give you some brief thoughts, maybe compare it to some other games out there as a bit of an elevator pitch, and then give you my rough ranking. For the sake of making this list actually fit onto a bit of a bell curve, those projects that have landed in D aren't necessarily terrible per se, but they are just less good than the rest. With the acknowledgement that what we play in a demo is just a very short glimpse into what the full game is like, and therefore not indicative of broader quality or an indictment of the game before it's fully out, here are the 37 games I played this Next Fest ranked. Rankings are obviously personal and a mixture of how much it wowed me, how much potential I see from the little I played, and an extra spice quotient. I asked myself, does this game have the juice? And evidently many do. Anyway, let's get on with it. Gothic 1 Remake. I threatened a man to let me stay in his camp within minutes of the demo, immediately got eviscerated because I didn't have any weapons, and that was the end of the demo. Incredible. The entire demo is janky, with mediocre voice acting, strange AI, and weird movement. It's also pretty tough and doesn't really explain anything. That doesn't mean there isn't something compelling about it though, and the choice to drop a demo for a remake of a cult hit like Gothic feels oddly brave. Giving a classic and slightly older RPG another chance nowadays feels like a solid idea, and development so far suggests this game could be just as weird as the game it's remaking. I like that this demo exists, even if it doesn't really give me any more faith in the game. That's a C tier for me. Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3. A bit too irreverent for its own good, Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3 is a match 3 game where you play a cop looking into a haunted mansion who is deathly afraid of the dinosaurs that may lurk inside. I'm not a huge fan of the premise, the start of its writing, or its gameplay system. There is a nugget of gold in there in the form of loop systems where you run through the same scenarios with new traits and earned knowledge, complete with wacky dialogue and self-aware jokes. There's definitely some heart here, but I don't know if it's the kind of heart I like. D tier. Mashina. This is quite a short demo, but does almost exactly what it should. Mashina is immediately striking in its aesthetic. Everything is stop motion and looks like they're made out of bits to hand, like glue, rubber, and ends of machinery. It's made by the devs behind Judero and definitely looks like it. The unique blends of actual scans and machinery also feels reminiscent of the likes of Garage Bad Dream Adventure. It's a lot more upbeat than that though, and the whole premise is that you have to mine into rocks to find minerals, to get little upgrades and take on new tasks. Think SteamWorld Dig, but with the most memorable aesthetic of the last few months, and you kind of get what Mashina is so far. A tier. Once Upon a Puppet. Playing a puppet, or more accurately, the hand controlling a puppet, Once Upon a Puppet is a creepy little nightmare-style take on its own little fairy tale, complete with creepy goo and robots killing other puppets in the land. A 2.5D platformer, the ambiance is good, but the gameplay and story are a little basic so far. It's well framed, with moody lighting and great character designs, and the hand mechanics make for fun slingshots and push-pull puzzles, but it needs to do a bit more to really grip me. C tier. Static Dread. Static Dread is a good name for this game. A lighthouse simulator in Eldritch World, it's your job to guide boats to the right pier, Papers, Please style, but it also has these other spinning plates, like keeping yourself awake, checking the door as neighbours come knocking, and making sure you never let anyone inside. It also has an excellent kind of retro but kind of wonky aesthetic that works really well in its favour. This is a game that feels served by being in just the right kind of mood, but it'll really spook you when it does. I think there's a chance for a game like this to go a little too hard into the YouTuber React style gameplay, but it hasn't hit that just yet. A tier. Wanderstop is from the creator of Stanley Parable, and that was sort of enough to make me want to play it by itself. It's about a fighter who has pushed herself so hard and for so long that she suffers from such a severe bout of burnout that she can no longer carry her own sword. In a pit stop between where she's from and a master to teach her more, she finds Wanderstop, a tea shop. She begrudgingly accepts the invitation to run it. The setup is fun, and the tone of the game tells me there could be some real heart in there. Unfortunately, these Sims-style games, especially ones with farming and a level of grind to them, rely entirely on the gameplay loop, and I didn't really get that here, as the demo is more so about setting up the story than the gameplay, especially the shop management. This is a tentative B tier for me. He is Coming. This one is simple conceptually, but makes a lot of sense. On a grid, you have to explore a map, and time only passes after each move. Your goal is to kill enough baddies and find enough gear to beat a boss that is choreographed ahead of time. Once you've beaten them, you keep exploring the map until the next one comes. You have a limited amount of inventory space for accessories, and then one weapon slot to do damage. It's a roguelike in the sense that you earn new items to unlock in further runs, but don't actually get new stats or permanent buffs. This isn't bad conceptually, the cover art looks great, the aesthetic itself is fine, otherwise it didn't really strike me after I turned it off. C tier. Nice Day for Fishing. Based on a sketch from Viva La Dirt League, this one is very reference and meta heavy in its tone and writing. This all feels a little, pun intended, out of water in 2025. You play an NPC who, through a bug in the game's code, has become an adventurer and must save the world as all the actual adventurers have been signed out. The gameplay loop of talk to NPC, get upgrade, catch fish, harvest garlic, get fish again, it kind of bored me quite quickly. There's room for this one to grow into something, but the demo doesn't do the best job at suggesting that. This one's a D tier for me. Roguelite Deck Builder, apart from being a great name for a game where you build decks under the glow of a light that only sometimes works, is kind of genius. It takes that grimy aesthetic reminiscent of both early PlayStation games and analog horror that you see in the likes of Buckshot Roulette, and this allows a fairly simple game about hammering in nails to feel kind of dark and mysterious. It gives you a good reason to keep going, other than upgrades like a better hammer, stocks for passive income, and a key to your freedom, perhaps. I think this could be popular among the types of crowds that like Bennett Foddy's Getting Over It, Quap, and even Only Up for its rigid physics. I do think that without enough incentives, one could get bored of the gameplay loop though. B tier. Do No Harm. This is a killer concept. A Dr. Sim in an eldritch world, but the execution so far is just okay. Patients come in, tell you their symptoms, you look it up in a big medical book and then treat them. Eventually, patients stop being able to articulate what's wrong, and you have to test them with certain vials to guess exactly what they need. Then there are gendered and nutritional restrictions. It piles on complexity, but the low amount of resources, which all cost the same amount to replenish, so you never feel incentivized to actually do stock taking, mixed with just okay atmosphere, feel a little old hat. I'd like to see more originality as the game goes along, because right now it feels very trope heavy and doesn't outweigh that with its other good elements. C tier. Is This Seat Taken is a puzzle game where you have to fit people into spaces based on personal preferences, like wanting to sleep or wanting to be next to a certain character. It's a relatively simple idea that has cute visuals and the underpinning of a quaint story underneath it. It feels like a good Sunday afternoon game, but it will need to do a good bit more to keep me entertained after a few hours, I think. C tier. Moroi. Moroi? Moroi? I think there's an L in there. It's vindictive, gross, and sadistic. Moroi is fascinating in just how bloody, gory, and weird it is. Part puzzle game, part isometric slasher, the world is made of meat, viscera, and even more meat. A take on a fantasy tale, even the demo flits pretty wildly from massacring tens of meaty soldiers to a grassy cute fairy tale gone wrong. It's easy to overdo the exact style of grim dark that Moroi is trying to spin, but the demo didn't just yet. B tier. I Nima. This one feels special. You play a young girl who, after an accident, can't remember what happened to her, much about her father, and why her mother is acting like this. To piece it together, you find words from memories and combine those words together to make new words. You can then occasionally put those words into Nima's mouth to say to her mother. It's creepy, fascinating, and nails the atmosphere and tone to be so much more. There's always a chance it diverges too hard into its many paths and doesn't quite pay off what is otherwise an interesting premise, but I'm really looking forward to this one. S tier. Run TavernQuest. Run TavernQuest really surprised me. A Zork-like game where instead of playing the player, you play as the computer, and your job is to get your player through it. This is a novel idea and perfectly explains why being the dungeon master can be such a tough role. It's funny, weird, and fresh. I could see the quirky, my player does the weirdest thing at every obstacle thing, getting a little tired if not done right, but in my playthrough of the demo, it managed to bring back choices made into a grander narrative well. A tier. The Horror at Highrook. This one is very clearly based on the formatting of a board game, and that makes it charming, but also hits that curve of I don't know what I'm doing, followed swiftly by this makes sense and has kind of lost its tension. Playing a handful of people exploring a haunted occult mansion, each character has stats they are good and bad at, and you find parts of a puzzle to figure out the story, only to be able to decrypt them with specific characters. This involves sending someone good with laboratory skills to the laboratory to wait for a puzzle piece to be found, only to have to monitor their health, hunger, fatigue at the same time. This often ends in a place where I feel artificially stopped from progressing to the story. It has a good aesthetic and some solid design principles, but it needs to get a lot right from the demo to nail that balance. C tier, but I'm hopeful. Descenders next. I have a soft spot for Descenders, the biking game from 2020. In fact, I reviewed it on this channel. Descenders Next, the snowboarding approach to the series, is fun, it feels smooth, it has that right vibe you look for hurtling down a hill to drum and bass. However, it felt quite easy and not always in the most satisfying way. I worry, based on Control, how in-depth that difficulty can really be. Call me tentatively excited for this one. C tier. Reignbreaker. In an effort to take down the Queen of Hearts, Reignbreaker has you take on the role of Clef, part of a heavily armoured, semi-robotic, semi-medieval resistance. This all feels very Supergiant to me, taken from games like Bastion and Hades, and even the music reminds me of Darren Korb, Supergiant's main composer. I enjoyed this demo, and it has a lot of what people would look for in a hack and slash roguelike, like run-to-run progression, creative ways of building combos, but it didn't really excite me. The aesthetics aren't bad, though parts of the UI can get a bit cluttered, but it didn't really make me want to keep playing. C tier, but it still feels very well made. Fear FA 98 is 90s PS1 horror meets FIFA 98, and it's incredibly unsubtle about it. The control scheme is designed to get more than one person playing on a single PC, which is a nice touch. Gameplay is pretty basic, and I felt more or less done with it after my first win. As it stands, I admire the aesthetic and commitment to the bit a whole lot, but I don't really know if I feel like I need more than what I've played. C tier, though, I think it has the potential to be more than that. The King is Watching is a strategy game where you play a king and your workers only work when you actually have your eye on them. From the sounds of that and the cover art, I was anticipating this would be more of a Papers, Please or Beholder style game where you feel almost a little evil for what you're doing, and that would play into the aesthetic of the world. It's not that, but it's still a novel idea and quite fun. It's a bit more simple in concept. You place wells down, get them functioning to harvest water, use that water on crops, use those crops to get gold, and then use gold to make people which can defend your town. Then, in waves, goblins try and take your castle down. It has level to level progression through a roguelite style currency system where you give yourself a bit more gold to start with, new soldiers or new spells. It's engaging and fun, though I could see that early level progression feeling a little stale. B tier. Badlands Crew. From the development team behind Bomber Crew and Space Crew, Badlands Crew is a game all about assembling a crew, building your own vehicles, upgrading both through doing missions, and taking on more and more dangerous quests until you have the biggest and best vehicle out there. Mixing a bit of Mad Max with Lovers in a Dangerous Spacetime, FTL, and Kerbal Space Program, this new demo shows a game I'm both a little afraid to get into given how specific vehicle building is, yet I'm also quite excited to learn it anyway. A tier. Lost in Random: The Eternal Die. I'm glad to see Lost in Random is back, as I quite like the original narrative-driven action game all about upending your lot in life and fighting oppressive preordained structures that determine every aspect of your life, seemingly without your consent. The Eternal Die mostly uses the original game's aesthetic and tone and shoves it into a roguelite. The gameplay is solid so far, power-ups give you a real reason to actually throw your dice, and your loadout gets buffs if you match 3 colours for the power-ups you pick up, which feels like a fun level of strategy to get ready for the next boss. It doesn't feel as narratively cohesive as the original game, but translates to the genre well. B tier. Fretless, The Wrath of Riffson. Fretless is a guitar-based RPG from Rob Scallon, a guitar YouTuber. Generally, YouTuber games don't always conjure the best image, but this one has a lot of heart to it and feels perfect for the type of videos he makes. With a soundtrack in the background, you fight by choosing riffs, and those riffs get more powerful if you tap as they hit. This not only rewards you for getting into the groove, but gives room for creativity as you play. Some of the monsters in the demo got a little samey without a dedicated level up system to make them go quicker, but the introduction of Guitar Hero style sections added to the experience. This is a tentative B tier, but we'll have to see some things to keep that moment-to-moment combat fresh. Monster Train 2. Having played the first game, I was quite looking forward to Monster Train 2, and it's pretty much what you'd expect from it. Mixing the likes of Slay the Spire with the Darkest Dungeon, you have to defend the Pyre, which is effectively the engine of a train from hordes of monsters that descend up floors. You have to set up defenses with cards and a limited amount of energy each turn to prep for the boss in just a handful of rounds. It seems very similar to the first game, which is both good and bad. B tier. Duck Detective: The Ghost of Glamping is a very cute detective game where you play a duck. Your job is to glean clues from around a room or location, put them together in the right order, and then use that to figure out whatever case you have found yourself pulled into. It's very whimsical and doesn't take itself very seriously, but it's very charming. It does seem like you can just brute force cases, but this isn't necessarily a bad thing. The writing so far is irreverent but cute. A tier. HASTE: Broken Worlds. Another very vibes-based game, HASTE takes the elements that make games like Echo Point Nova work well and intensifies it all into movement. A speedrunner game all about dropping from the air at the right moment to hit curves of hills, this is one of those projects that I wouldn't be surprised if it was conceptualized almost like a Sonic fan game and burst into its own thing. The story seems mostly throwaway so far, but the roguelike elements mean you can do runs, which I think will lend itself to a speedrunning community nicely. A tier. Skin Deep. This one really took me by surprise. Skin Deep is a block adventure game inspired by immersive sims where you have to go on board ships taken over by pirates that can sever their own heads to respawn when knocked out. You do this all to rescue talking cats. You then have to do silly things like throw pepper at the pirates to blind them, and then you can jump on them to whack them into things, or put down banana peels in their path to make them fall over. With vents everywhere and tons of little items to interact with, it feels scrappy and pretty open-ended. The demo is very short, so it doesn't fully go over how immersive the game can get, but it's tonally so strange in a really unique way and quite fun to explore. A tier. Twister Tower. I feel quite conflicted on this one. There seems to be some decent level variety involved, and it makes a promise that replaying it will give you access to different levels. However, this very Bioshock-like project has a few cracks already. The premise of a man at the end of World War II that has his wife leave him for a more established man is invited to a creepy carnival for treasure is silly and not in a way that fits the tone of the game. The voice acting is off-putting and everything feels a little floaty in a way that feels a tad off. It doesn't seem all that inspired, but there is room for creativity in its guns, puzzles, and more. C tier. Demon Tides. I played and enjoyed Demon Turf, this developer's previous game, so this has been on my radar for a while. This takes the combo platforming traversal system of that game and points it to a much bigger sandbox filled with islands to explore and puzzles to figure out. The area of the demo is small, but the feeling of speeding through water as a snake and figuring out the mystery behind islands is quite engaging, and the platforming is as crisp as ever. I think this could be a really solid collectathon. B tier. Solarpunk. Solarpunk is a survival crafter that differentiates itself by setting the game in the sky. Like Minecraft's game mode Skyblock, it sets you somewhere very distant, points at a floating island miles away and says maybe, just maybe, you can get there. The basic loop is the same as many survival crafters, but the look is good and UI is easy to navigate. For the right kind of person, this is perfect. For me, it's a C tier. Arctic Awakening has all the things you would expect from a decently popular survival crafter on Steam. Your plane goes down in a bad snowstorm, it tears in half, you are split from your co-pilot, and you have to build a fire and salvage scrap to survive the night. However, this isn't a survival crafter, and is actually a story-driven adventure game where you have a therapy bot as a companion as you search for your co-pilot and find a way out. Its atmosphere is solid, the music is tense, however the demo didn't really draw me in or make me want to keep playing to figure out what the mystery is. C tier. Everhood 2. This one clearly wants to be esoteric, a little introspective, and very weird. Combining those more trippy moments of the likes of Earthbound with Guitar Hero, it's flippant and strange, but not uncompelling. Even the demo is a bit grindy, which dampens expectations somewhat, but this one could be decent. B tier. Despelote. Sorry if I've mispronounced that, googling pronunciation gave me two different choices, so I went with the more common. This game feels like a Panic published game in a really great sense. It's a narrative adventure, and a pretty experimental one at that, about the explosion in popularity of football in Ecuador and the elements throughout a child's life where it's implemented. It's charming and very warm so far with a unique art style. B tier. Wordatro is incredibly honest about what it is. It's effectively Balatro but with words. You are playing Scrabble but against a score, and instead of playing on a board you just make the biggest words you can. Adding to this, you unlock multipliers and special effects that apply to the letters you play. To add to this, you can put letters back a certain amount of times, and the amount of words you play total is shared between levels, which means you're rewarded for playing really well early on. It didn't blow me out of the water, but it is genuine fun, if a little obvious. C tier. ChromaGun 2 Die Hard. This is a puzzle game that feels heavily inspired by the likes of Portal, but still manages to keep its own identity. Effectively, you have a gun that can shoot a handful of colours, and you have to get through puzzles by pulling and pushing blocks into certain places by matching their colours. I'm already seeing increasing levels of intensity as I play, and different ways of thinking about not only colours but mechanics. It's simple but effective. B tier. Shotgun Cop Man is one of those games that gets your heart pumping, and yet you feel like you're better at the game as a result. You play Shotgun Cop Man, a dude trying to take down and arrest Satan. It's incredibly tongue-in-cheek and clearly just a setup to get you firing bullets and doing tricks. Reminiscent of the likes of My Name is Pedro and Hotline Miami, this one is one of the best feeling games this Next Fest. I don't suspect the story is going to do too much, but its gameplay has the juice. S tier. Castle v Castle. This originally got on my radar because it was funded by the dev behind Slay the Spire. And honestly, if you like Slay the Spire, I think this may click with you. It's a 1v1 battler where you build up castles, earning resources through playing cards, which you then spend to take down the opponent. It's a bit more flash in the pan from what I've played so far, with more linear progression, and the rebuilding of your castle and resources every game means you often don't have to think too far ahead. B tier. Promise Mascot Agency. An ex-Yakuza decides to open up a mascot agency alongside a severed thumb mascot by driving around a city, picking up jobs, recruiting new mascots, and sending them off to do PR stunts. When that mascot runs into problems, you can summon heroes to help them out. Once they are back, you may have to renew their contract or send them on holiday to stop them burning out. Feeling like a dragon minigame fleshed out into its own big world, Promise Mascot Agency is weird, funny, and oddly dark at points. I also only stopped playing because I know I want to try the full game. It's also made by the dev behind Paradise Killer, and it shows. It's creative, unique, and has some memorable music. S tier. And with that, there are all 37 Steam Next Fest demos I played at the start of 2025. It's important to note that just because a game got into COD doesn't mean it doesn't have great potential, and just because it got into S doesn't mean it can't be squandered. This is almost entirely vibes based, and I only ever played any of these games for anywhere between 20 minutes to over an hour. I likely miss details in many of these demos, but try to go into them with the same mindset I would have if I was just some guy browsing Steam downloading stuff to play. With that out of the way, here are the stats. I rated 3 games in S tier, 7 games in A tier, 12 games in B tier, 13 games in C tier, and 2 games in D tier. I don't think I played a single demo that didn't have some sort of potential, but many of those in the lower tiers either didn't do enough to really make me all that interested, or felt very limited in how far the boat could get pushed out in the full release. Though Steam Next Fest for February and March is now over, let me know what you played this year, what I'm missing out on, and if you skipped it all to play Monster Hunter Wilds instead. If you have any interest in the games I talked about, and I remember to actually do it, there should be a whole list of Steam game pages below to wishlist the games. Thank you for watching, and do let me know if you want to see more like this.